Hey everyone, it's it's that time again, I guess. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're watching the Misery Loves Company weekly social reading series. Each Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, we have readings from different, I think the term we've been using is outsider and transgressive artists. It's hosted by miserytourism.com, and I think that's basically all I've got to say about that. I'll be posting links to the pieces being read, at least by our scheduled readers, in the Zoom chat and also on Twitter. So if you're watching this after the fact, if you go to miserytourism.com, click on the link for this article, you'll find a link to the Twitter thread in there. Just go on Twitter and search it out. Okay, first up, I think, is Derek. And Derek, you're going to be reading a piece that was just published on Expat this week, right?
I think 2 weeks ago, maybe, or something.
Oh,
I think
maybe
it was last week.
last week makes sense. Yeah, I
But
saw October 15th, and I don't know what day it is anymore.
yeah, so thank you again for having me again. I love reading here. I'm trying to get my screen to where I can actually see what I'm reading. Okay, so this is called Bruce in His Chair, and it is actually a piece dedicated to my friend Jeff Gadwa, who passed away in 2007. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound
Yeah.
good.
Oh,
Great.
yeah, you sound great. Sorry, I had my mic muted, but you sound perfect.
The first day Carl showed up for work at Bruce's apartment was a Thursday, which meant he had to give Bruce an enema. Bruce only shat on Mondays and Thursdays. Carl had never administered an enema. Bruce talked him through it lying on his side. Carl popped a capsule out of its plastic casing. He squirted Vaseline on his gloves and guided the capsule with his pointer finger slowly up Bruce's asshole, then said something stupid. Carl asked him, "Am I hurting you?" And Bruce laughed. "I haven't felt anything below my neck in 20 years, dumbass." Bruce liked to drink vicariously, and Carl just liked to drink. After 2 beers, Bruce would start in. "What does it feel like?" "It feels like I'm floating in the ocean and a little wave just rolled underneath me." Bruce liked to hear the descriptions. He wanted to know when the sensation came, when it changed, when it left. He would spit his chaw in an empty Dr. Pepper 20 ounce, pulling the bottle right up to his lips like he was going to kiss it, using his wrists to gain leverage. After 7 or 8 beers, he'd be really excited. "Room spinning yet, champ?" He'd pry with a goofy, cockeyed grin. If he knew that this was just necessary maintenance for Carl, a light pre-gaming, he was cool enough to pretend otherwise. So Carl humored him. "It feels like I'm bouncing up and down on the world's biggest marshmallow trampoline." Carl took the bus home every night at 10 p.m. when his shift ended. He waited for the bus in the bitter New Hampshire cold, furious with himself for leaving the South. On the bus, he played Snake on his Nokia cell phone, and he did not look out the window and did not look at the other passengers and did not collect memories. Carl's apartment was a finished room above a barn with a bathroom. The barn sat at the top of the hill of the college town, about a 10-minute walk in the cold down to the bars teeming with kids his age living very different lives. The Truman Capote line rolled around his head those 2 winters he spent in New Hampshire. It's as if Perry and I grew up in the same house, and one day he stood up and went out the back door while I went out the front. Carl's room was filled with those books, most of them dog-eared to pages with passages like the Capote. He would crawl around the floor in a particularly manic phase, scratching at the carpet, slobbering drunk, leaving guttural voice messages to friends back home, knocking over stacks of books, searching for a sentiment to put himself at ease. He rarely read whole books. Narratives bored him or made him angrier. He hated the idea of things happening. He hated characters changing. If he liked a character, then he wanted him or her to stay exactly like that, immobile on the page, impenitent, incapable of change. Every change, every so-called growth, anything resembling an arc was a step towards death, that impassioned march. Fictional characters should resist this fate and were uniquely positioned to do so. They existed as private emotional avatars for anyone who needed them. Carl imagined he was never alone in that room, as suffocatingly small as it was. It wasn't just Perry. He conjured Travis McGee, Danny Deck, Nick Corey, Eddie Brown, Quentin Thompson, and Jack Levitt. Those were his friends. Carl resisted Bruce's friendship at first because the company that hired him, Granite State Independent Living, told him Bruce was going to die, and when he did, Carl would have to be reassigned. While they waited to reassign him, he would not be paid any portion of his $11 an hour wages, but the demand for aides far outstripped the supply, so the home office scheduler assured him he should not worry when it came time to switch assignments. That is what they said before he started, and that is how they said it. Carl had a cat, Jello, that mostly stayed outside. One night she was mauled by something. The hissing and wailing actually woke Carl up. He lit a cigarette and walked outside. There was nothing but darkness. The next morning, he found some of Jello's fur, and he kept finding it for weeks after. Bruce loved an outing. His primary existence occurred in his small bedroom, watching Law and Order reruns during the day and the Boston Red Sox in the evenings. In the off-season, he suffered from depression and watched action movies. From his bed, he could see into the other room in his apartment, but only enough to spot the fridge and a few counters. His world was small and unchanging. The tiniest adventure outside was a godsend. His favorite activity was to have Carl get him and his chair up into his blue retrofitted van and take him to Applebee's to play Keno and eat boneless ribs. I don't understand how you can eat those. I can still chew, asshole. No, I mean, they look fucking gross. A rib cannot be boneless. A rib is a bone. Do you want to eat a bone? I can ask Sarah to get us a bone from the kitchen. The waitress's name was Dawn, which Bruce 100% knew, but it cracked him up to call every woman under 50 Sarah. Bruce was really warming up. I will sit here and watch you lick that little bone to your heart's content. The Sox are in Oakland tonight, so game doesn't start for 3 more hours. I have all night, and it would be an honor to watch you suck a bone dry. Carl rolled his eyes, shook his head, and just kept on drinking his beer. Bruce was cracking himself up. Carl was feeling sensitive. When Carl started getting like this, Bruce could sense it immediately. He would harangue him, scold him, laugh at him. Bruce believed living too much inside your own head was dangerous. He lived in a bed and a chair in mostly one room, and to watch someone who lived in the entire world, free to move and drink and fuck and trip and bathe himself, just sit idly stewing in his thoughts was a giant fuck you to Bruce. At the corner of Legends, the bar Carl would walk to most nights after work, there was a MegaTouch video game machine. Carl would walk in and prepare his area. An ashtray, a pitcher of Coors Light, a roll of quarters. He fed the machine endless quarters, chain-smoking Basic Light 100s, drinking that night's special on draft. Carl only ever played 2 games. Tri-Towers was a solitaire-type card game. He played that sometimes. But mostly he played Erotic Photo Hunt, which had 2 seemingly identical pornographic images side by side with 5 subtle differences in the photos that you had to spot before the timer ran out. He would play it for hours. Not for one single hour that Carl lived in that town did the top 10 of Erotic Photo Hunt at Legends Bar and Grill ever feature a name that was not his. The nurse came on Fridays to clean the wounds and administer the shots. The nurse changed every few months. Bruce flirted with all of them. All of them told him to stop chewing tobacco. He'd spit the juice into his Dr. Pepper 20-ounce with such a brilliant, beautiful grin in reply. Carl placed his hand on Bruce's bare chest to roll him on his side. Carl placed the disposable pad under Bruce's ass. The new nurses, even the oldest ones, always flinched. Bruce had 2 bed sores so deep and wide you could stick your fists inside of him. Each one looked like a crater or an abyss, the body folding in on itself. Carl wiped the pus and blood around the sores gently with a damp cloth. Bruce's body was disappearing. Carl talked loudly over the nurse, usually about the score of the baseball game, or if it was a Wednesday, the latest Lost cliffhanger, so Bruce would not hear the nurse's groans. Bruce's body was eating itself. When the nurse left, they ate king-size Reese's peanut butter cups and talked about how hot the nurse had been, how nasty she was in bed, and the filthy little mouth she probably had. One time, Bruce said, "I bet she wants to crawl inside me." And Carl pretended not to hear him, having nothing to follow that. Carl was slowly losing his bearings in the apartment. Before moving to New Hampshire, back home, he had been gripped with a sudden, necessary compulsion to run. A scream inside Carl ordered him to drive his Jeep Cherokee as fast as he could into a telephone pole. It happened on that empty stretch of road buttressed by cornfields, right by the ditch where he could tangle his body with the metal and erase his consciousness. In that moment of terror, his consciousness was split into two non-functioning antagonistic sections at war inside his skull, which caused actual, real physical discomfort, like a vertigo separated by two giant fields of brick, his head a bouncing ball passing back and forth between this violence. The only agreement the two sides reached was a near constant begging to shut the other half down to quiet these tremors. The graceful path being a sacrifice of the body, such a temporal thing anyway, and useless besides if the consciousness could not settle this argument. But he had a moment of clarity and instead slid slowly into the ditch, sobbing for hours until a passing car stopped and helped him out, physically unharmed. He knew then he had to leave. He picked New Hampshire because it sounded boring, but ever since he arrived, he had slipped further into himself. His waking and sleeping dreams were often a fantastical reenactment of his crash. He would stack his cheap paperbacks around him where he lay in the apartment and balance as many as he could all over his body, trying to maintain an absolute stillness, like he used to when he created elaborate forts of stuffed animals as a boy, and he wanted to feel every bit of his body physically attached and connected to something that was not himself. He was not well, and would have succumbed to the screams if it were not for Bruce and their burgeoning friendship. Also, without Carl, Bruce could not take a shit. This gave Carl a purpose he needed that year. "I'll pay you. It's free money, Bruce." "Can't, champ. Wish I could. Wish I could." Bruce did wish he could, but he also resented Carl for asking when he knew the guidelines. Bruce's apartment was a building specifically and only for single paraplegic and quadriplegic men. No spouses could live there. Overnight guests were allowed once a month for a single evening. The state of New Hampshire paid the rent, and the state of New Hampshire made the rules. This was a last resort place built for men the world had no use for. A spouse, roommate, loved one, significant other. If there was anyone else in the picture capable and willing, then the state was off the hook. So the arrangement was they would provide housing, 24-hour nursing on call, a morning aid, evening aid, and in return, you didn't sublet your couch to your drunk evening aid. After Carl left that night, Bruce cried. Carl would never know how much Bruce wished he could. For Carl, it was a temporary lack of shelter. Without getting into the specifics, he'd said he'd been kicked out of his apartment and just needed a favor for a few nights. For Bruce, living with someone else was a fundamental need in the hierarchy that he would never be allowed access to. One day, 16 years before, Bruce was riding in the front seat of a Toyota Camry, and he didn't hear anything, and he didn't see anything, and he didn't feel anything, and he didn't remember anything, and then he was, in an instant, a burden to everyone and everything around him. His body was now an obstruction. His body was a thing that had to be tended to by others. His body was useless and caused everyone problems, and he would never feel any part of it again. Part of what that meant is he didn't get to climb that hierarchy. His problems were not a gnashing against a coming adulthood. He couldn't piss without paid help. He had two giant fucking holes in his ass. Yes, he wished he could offer Carl a room. He wished he could live with someone. He felt for Carl going through a tough time, but Bruce didn't know any other kind. An unspoken boundary had been crossed. So he cried that night, not because he had to say no or because he couldn't have a roommate. Bruce had dealt with all that shit years before. He cried because Carl had asked. The next morning, Bruce woke up before the morning aid arrived and pressed a button on his bed, signaling for the front desk. He had them call Granite State Independent Living. He asked them to reassign Carl. Carl was on the white linoleum floor in the kitchen of his apartment. He was naked. The responding officer wrote, "Male, early 20s, found undressed in state of panic. Spoke to landlord, male, late 40s, lives next door in main house. Tenant rents room. Is converted barn. Room is a mess. Books covering floor. Some books torn up. Heavy alcohol smell. Bottles and food stuff everywhere. Young man requests to plead the fifth. Screams repeatedly at officer's intention to plead the fifth. Unable to follow simple commands. Taken in for one night of disorderly conduct and for psychological evaluation." Carl woke up the next morning in jail with no memory or place to stay. He consented to an interview with a social worker, identifying herself as Donna Thomason. The interview was perfunctory, and Carl only whispered quietly that he was sorry, that he had no memory of the events being described to him, that he had no place to stay, that he had no history of psychological traumas nor suicidal ideations, that yes, he drank to excess, that he was willing to attend an anonymous meeting, that yes, he knew where Christ Church was, that he rode the bus and needed to get to work soon, that he would be able to stay with his friend Bruce if he could just please get going so he wasn't late to work, that Bruce was his best friend and it was no problem at all. Are they still serving breakfast, ma'am? Is who still serving breakfast? The jail people. No, they do not serve breakfast here. Carl signed papers and received pamphlets and left a free man on an empty stomach. What the fuck? You asked them to reassign me? Carl, sit down. Bruce's voice was expertly measured. I don't want to sit down. You fucking sit down. They both laughed. Bruce in his chair, Carl standing a few feet away, gripping the railing of the rented hospital bed hard. Carl started bawling. They're going to make me watch Jeff. Jeff lived in the apartment 5 doors further down the hallway, closer to the nurse's station. Jeff was round. He had a weird, mean cat that was also round. It smells like shit in there, Bruce. He eats fucking cat food, wet cat food, out of the can. I told him once it wasn't tuna, and he laughed at me. Said he didn't give 3 fucks, man. Carl, I'm not going to. He doesn't even have a fucking TV. He listens to the radio, Bruce. Bruce, he listens to the radio. Carl fell to his knees and jokingly mimicked crawling towards Bruce in his chair, clasping his hands together in prayer, pleading, the fucking radio, man. That kind of psycho will cut me in little pieces. He'll sick his cat on me. You can't do this to me. Bruce told Carl to get off the floor and sit down on the bed. I live here, Carl. I know, man. I'm not trying to. Bruce's voice boomed. His eyes got much, much smaller and focused in on Carl. Don't interrupt me. I listen to your bullshit. Now you listen to mine. I'm sorry. I live here. You're just visiting. Working, actually, or supposed to be. But let's say you weren't working and you were just here. You'd still be visiting. I'll die here, either in this chair or on that bed, and sooner than not. But not you, Carl. You're just stopping over for a while, then it'll be back out there. Next place, next town, next job. Get drunk, fuck, get married, babies, watch them grow, get old. I see it all, man. Bruce was crying harder than anyone had ever cried in front of Carl. Before, since, ever. And I'll just be a story you tell about how funny it was that you had to stick your finger up my ass. Carl was sober, and now he felt sober, and he sounded sober and resigned. Yeah, well, things aren't going real good right now. They will. You watch. You're not going to be some story I tell at parties. Bruce laughed a big, turbulent laugh. It will be so far away, it won't even feel like your life. You'll tell it in third person. And Bruce, in his chair, was right.
Oh man, oh man. First of all, the shit with the voice recording, that just incredible, incredible touch. I fucking loved that. Uh, I also like the continuity with the previous story in terms of like the cat food eating shit. I like to think like now I'm like forming a like cat food eating cinematic universe or something around your work. um, as someone who lived in New Hampshire for 7 years until very recently, I really appreciated the level of like attention to detail here. Like, I know that Granite State independent living is a real thing. And actually, I worked in a nonprofit that worked with seniors. And so we had clients who would move into Granite State independent living and things like that. So I was like, it was like, holy shit, like that's a really great level of attention to detail. And there were other stuff in there where I was like, yep, that's New Hampshire. It was fantastic. Just one last quick thing. The line there about the books that he read and wanting to read books that didn't have like a really that didn't have a lot of plot movement, and also where the characters didn't change. Man, I feel that. I feel that 100%. Yeah, no, it was great.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I was gonna say something about that line too, the change thing. That man, that hit hard. That was really pretty great, pretty accurate. I really like the ending line too. It'll be so far away, it won't even feel like your life. You'll tell it in third person. That's such a good, like, man. That's a great way to phrase that. It's so good.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, it was a pleasure to read. I'm glad I got to do it.
Yeah, thanks so much for reading. It's always great to hear your work. I don't know, in part, I think it's because, like, Rudy and I, like, grew up in that kind of, like, rundown white trash kind of rural, like, world and, like, all of the characters that you write about feel like dudes that I've met before, you know? And like,
Yeah, same.
I've never been more excited to read a piece than what you guys will publish of mine in November. Like, as far as something that needs
Nice.
to be read out loud, like that is going to be hilarious.
oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
really looking forward to that too. All right,
Absolutely.
Rudy, you're up next, and you're going to read a piece that we actually just published this fucking morning or this afternoon. So,
Yeah.
what is it? DJ Clue exclusive new shit or whatever.
Exclusive, new shit. Yeah, so this is a piece, it's a bit of a con-worlding, in-world type of piece. The way I put it on Twitter, for anybody who might have seen it on there or not seen it, it's basically a world where all men become cosplaying rapists at night and women have to fight them with kung fu. That's the tagline of it. So yeah, kind of weird. Trigger warning, rape. I mean, yeah, it's kind of disgusting, some of it, but yeah. So this piece is titled Homewrecker. The title of the piece in the In World magazine, which is called Seance, it's not Medium, it's Seance, is I'm a homewrecker. I kick holes in walls so that women are safer at night. Subtitle is We Shouldn't Fear Disharmony by Demona Viento Aguedo. Also, I apologize if I cut out a little bit. My mic is kind of fucked up tonight. It's 5:30 on a balmy Friday morning, and I've just put my work gear on. My heavy Timberlands clash with the stark white of the crisply ironed competition gi that hangs loosely over my lanky frame. I tie my belt, black as the tomcat still asleep on my futon, into a simple bow, because it's Friday and the intricacies of the Japanese bow knots worn by last century's most prominent karatikas are evading my coffee-deprived brain. My ancestors were from Burlington, Vermont. We don't do anything without our single-origin, fair trade, certified Green Mountain roast. My fab is already working on that, sourcing that rich bean flavor from molecules that were on Jupiter like 2 seconds ago. And I know it seems contrary to the single origin thing, but hey, we're all connected, right? 6:33 comes too soon, even though the portal is opening late. I focus my sleep-dusted eyes on the image of a Whole Foods drone spray painting a mural of Cesar Chavez over some gang tags, and let its hum calm me as the familiar bodegas and pop-up galleries of my Chicano reclaimed Mission District run together like some Hall of Mirrors effect from video game antiquity. Soon the glitched Pueblo browns and grays give way to white, blinding white, and I'm situated in greater upstate New York. My partner, Tao, is backing our org's nondescript van up the gravel turf driveway of a little tiny house that is going to be this morning's labor of love, and last for me this week since I'm done at 11:30 today. Mostly due to the face she makes at me through the window, which forces me out of my daydream of pajamas and Friday afternoon's cat snugglage and into bookkeeping mode. I record this as an outer perimeter compensatory adjustment in the logs, which is a suitably bureaucratic description that I feel would satisfy some very old or very dead practitioners of our art. I imagine a snowy-haired Chinese man in booming 21st century Hong Kong mumbling, outer perimeter compensatory adjustment as he dramatically straightens his long sleeves to hang a bagua mirror on someone's doorstep that will deflect the harmful energy from a skyscraper. I'm not a feng shui master yet. My certs from DeVry College of Government Affairs are so far mostly in ninja counterinsurgency and martial heroism. But I understand enough to know the difference between that science's current incarnation and its ancient one. The rape epidemic has reversed a lot of things, and the yin-yang dynamic is just the latest casualty. Most readers probably know that modern feng shui is about ensuring the stagnation of life energy, or vital qi as it's known to practitioners, in domestic spaces. Many may not know that the ancient philosophy was very different. In fact, its practitioners were concerned with doing the very opposite. A little FYI detour. Old school feng shui masters concerned themselves with preserving a home's tranquility through the management of the masculine and feminine energies. Stagnation of energy was to be avoided at all costs, and there were various techniques for accomplishing this. Truly, the idea of domestic harmony is an outmoded one with lots of institutional baggage from across time. The literature is old and filled with era-appropriate, though still startling, love letters to the patriarchy, such as this little zinger. What happens if a female sleeps on the right yang side? If she is single, she is taking up the masculine energy. She is not leaving a place for the male energy to enter her life. Que barbaro. But while I may quibble with the language here, the ideas expressed have certainly proven true by the epidemic's brutal metamorphosis of the human condition. Since magical were-rapists became, well, a thing, we have all come to fear the ninja clan's nightly chi-powered rampages. What was once a weird mystical energy confined to the pages of superhero comics and the user interfaces of gender-locked action RPGs is now something very real and dangerous. Chi can allow real men to do shit like this. This being a video of Goku dropping the spirit bomb on Frieza. But real life, unlike anime, has an unlimited number of episodes to explore the fallout from such outbursts. Spoiler alert, it's depressing, and can't be canceled for more compelling alternatives when horny hikikomori stop masturbating to it. As I unload my bow staff and put on my goggles, I remind myself that, like the ancients, we're here to preserve and uphold domestic harmony, albeit in a different way. In the past, regulating chi was a matter of home and hearth. Now it's a matter of global security. Chi embiggens ninjas, and its residual effects allow the men who will become them at night to revitalize and recuperate from their cursed nocturnal activity during the slow, sedentary workdays. We can't allow that. As the two of us approach the home, we have a kind of swagger in our step. Tao is a diminutive 5'1", and I'm 135 pounds soaking wet, but we feel like giants. As we crunch through the fresh snow, I pretend that my steps are breaking ninja spines in a purely non-lethal way, of course. He's lucky, I say with a snarl that's hopefully less tangible than my chilled breath. Lucky that my paragraph 13 keeps me from night duty. The he here is every nighttime phantom, and some daytime ones, not specifically the guy who lives in this mockery of Adirondack Great Camp architecture. Tao pushes a small wheelbarrow full of broken cuckoo clocks. We leave these at every site when we finish up just to ensure success. I've set them all to 6:45 because I have a sense of humor that I'm 25 years too old for, which means that Sarah Silverman must be like 4,025 years too old for it by now. We park our little bounty near the front door and straighten ourselves. I fret about my belt while Tao adjusts her tie and brushes the fallen snow off of her smart black blazer. She knocks and we wait. I look up at the top floor window, which has some gaudy rustic trimming on it. A teddy bear surveys the yard from it within. Icicles have started to form on the ornately carved faux pine soffits. A prepubescent boy answers the door. Hello. Tao enunciates dryly, hints of authority creeping into her voice. Is this the Beja residence? He nods, looking past us to a snowbound skidoo, in the front yard that I must have missed. Are there any adults home? The child spins on his bare heel and springs off of it, launching himself back into the recesses of the house. His movements are lithe, inch perfect. If he were a little older, they might read as a kind of subconscious stotting, echoes from nighttime muscle memory. A few moments later, a writhing mass of black hair with red highlights emerges from behind the partially ajar door. A hand parts the sea of locks, revealing a woman's squinting, pimply face. She pulls the strings on her plaid pajama bottoms taut, then welcomes us in. The first thing I notice after traveling through the foyer, which looks like the staging ground for a weekend camping trip, is that this place is pretty transparently a house of leaves, one of those cliched Frankenmergers of architecture and pop physics that makes general contractors in rural areas want to eat their camo patterned deer rifles. Oh, Dios mío, I exclaim psychically, nearly tripping over an oil lantern as I step into a room that's twice the size of the fucking driveway we backed the van into. There's no way I'm getting out of here by 11:30. Bigger on the inside can eat my fucking ass. I twirl my bow staff thoughtfully as the woman, who is studying architecture at the local community college part-time, discusses the ins and outs of the house's construction and renovation history. The pictures made it look like a prefab, easy peasy. I'm kind of salty that we were deceived, but a job is a job. Tal goes over the details, explaining that yes, we will be trashing their family abode. The woman agrees to keep the children, the little boy and his younger female sibling, out of our hair while we work. Here, she says as the boy collides violently with her lower half, wrapping up Mummy with the tenacity of, I don't know, some kind of Egyptian defensive lineman. That I can do. I don't get the reference at first, but then I notice her cosmetology degree mounted on the wall underneath an imposing pair of antlers. Tal follows my gaze, taking an apparently too cursory glance at the magenta trim paper, which has the letters BOCES printed on it. Oh, you work in quantum stuff, huh? Tal asks, giving the woman a kind of incredulous look. Our host blinks and scratches her head a bit, nodding as if trying to interpret both the words and the exuberance. Oh, Tal continues, determined to wedge her favorite STEM field into this conversation. Entanglement, decoherence, strings. She twirls her fingers around each other each time she mentions a physics concept. Something like that, but I mean, mops, definitely. The woman chortles. I give a half-hearted snort. Tal mouths the words mops several times, trying to Sherlock the physics buzzword circulating her brain into the non-existent acronym that will allow her to say mops, of course, that means, and extend the conversation another 2 minutes. Eventually, she gives up and restarts her work spiel with an anyway, sorry. Paperwork intensifies. The waiver process goes pretty simply, all things considered. When we go in to do home wrecking, people are supposed to mark personal objects that are off limits with glow tape so that they are clearly distinguished. This is so we don't destroy family heirlooms or really expensive shit that has some utility. Obviously, there's no point in breaking electronics or entertainment systems, and utilitarian stuff like appliances are never a target. I'm not going to break my hand punching through a toilet or something anyway. However, rendering some rarely used appliances non-working is kosher, since the feng shui of any home takes a huge dive when there are useless, out-of-order gadgets lying around. The little boy brings up an old toaster that never sees any action because Lana, the sister presumably, always burns weird things in it. After confirming with the head of the household, I record this and fumble through our supply bag for the screwdriver. While Tao is making conversation with the woman, I quietly disable it by removing the lever. The walls in here are all made of these god-awful Lincoln logs. I aim a test punch at one of the non-load-bearing beams near the front of the den area. A sharp pain shoots up my knuckle as I bust it open, leaving a red splotch on the now chipped bark. Bio, I remarked to Tao before reaching into the bag for the X-Clean. Gee, don't die, Tao says softly, smirking. The woman of the house twists her mouth to the side and raises a brow. I grab a pair of heavy gloves out of my ghost satchel, squeezing their wrists as I put them on. Nanites crawl out of the fabric and up my fingertips, a stem that tweaks my autistic brain in just the right way at this point in time. Suddenly, I'm feeling social. I plant my feet in a fighting stance. Zab Judah, I dip right. Ali, left. Tao tucks her clipboard under an arm, then puts her dukes up. She mimics my fake battle dance as best she can with approximately 1/4 of my rhythm. We jostle around each other for a bit, making Street Fighter noises. Our host looks on, nodding wide-eyed, with a very nervous, a very toothy smile that says, I really don't want a Mandingo fight in my living room. There's going to be enough shattered porcelain as there is. We straighten up when her aura of white cringe becomes palpable. Tao goes back to architorture talk, and I set about the task of kicking the shit out of anything inorganic. While I'm working, the Google speech attendant dutifully records my articulations of esoteric jargon, forming them into a neat post-activity site report with algorithmic sorcery. My fist goes through some paneling, void adjustment. I pivot on the heel of my boot and thrust my staff through some particle board glamored to look like indigenous hand-hewed North Country stone. Partition curse. A table full of Fab Spawn Magic the Gathering proxies crumples under an elbow. Possession bane. As I'm heaving after the first round of exertions, a scraggly little dog whose coat resembles two sewn together Fraggles fucking in a soot factory emerges from the back porch pet portal and shriek barks. He's quickly grabbed by a swarthy gentleman wearing fur-lined house shoes, clearly the Amir, adult male in residence. We make eye contact as his broad, heavily scarred hands silence the pooch with rhythmic chin and neck strokes. He nods. I brush some dirt off my shoulder. I nod back. He looks away. After a sweaty couple of hours, I get the signal from Tao that we're ready to move on to the upstairs. I look at the floor and I see it needs sweeping, is what she tells me, which is her peculiar way of remarking that the job is halfway done and it's time for our second wind. Cosmetology, Tao quips, punching me in the arm while wearing a gaping grin. I love how you guys were just going to let my dumb ass go on and on and on about quantum shit, and meanwhile it's big bangs, I insert. She blinks. A contentious issue in both disciplines. Knowledge dropped. Tao's echoing guffaw rounds the corner with us as we step off the slender wooden steps onto the landing. We start our inspection of the upper level and are pleasantly surprised. The children's room is typical. A rec fab has been left idling on the girls' side and is constantly churning out Barbies of different shapes and sizes. Its matter source has been set to nearby local, so as it's assembling busty bimbos or flat-chested bimbos or handicapped bimbos in wheelchairs, it's also tearing apart G.I. Joes on the boys' side, reclaiming their plastic in a way that looks eerily like Thanos' snap. We pass by a bathroom with a runny toilet, prompting a thumbs up from Tao. She peeks inside and notes the disarray of towels and conspicuous clothes heap blocking the door's range of motion. Excellent, she declares. We make our way into the master bedroom. It could definitely stand a decluttering, but we judge that its condition could be more unkempt, and because the bedroom is such a cornerstone in our practice, we decide to intervene. Tao tips over a small dresser, then pauses, like a cinematographer sizing up the scene between their fingers, before draping a wet washcloth from the master bath over top of it. I move to tip over a bookshelf, but she stops me. A glow tape picture of the adult male in residence sits on the top ledge, bathing our faces in its yellowish gold luminance. I mistook it for stray sunlight in my haste. Wow, good catch, I say. Tao nods modestly. There are certain things that are weird or creepy to find during a wrecking. Shrines to deceased relatives are one of my personal bug outs, along with dirty night laundry. Ugh, seriously. Finding someone's cum and blood-stained guardian robes on the washer next to their significant other's Ninja Clan costume, the type of sick still life shit that some 20th century pervert auteur like Kubrick would highlight, contributing to the visual corpus of the male gaze, has had me vomit more than once. But signs of possible daylight domestic abuse, or well, worse, trespasses, are definitely up there as far as shit ain't nobody need. While dirtying, we unintentionally unmount a frame picture of a venerable-looking old buck who resembles our female host in all ways besides his decidedly off-white complexion. A patch on his ball cap reads, Akwesasne Mohawk Casino, and his thumb is cocked towards a billboard with a picture of 4 Native American warriors circa a long fucking time ago, caption, Homeland Security, fighting terrorism since 1492. As I chastise myself for making assumptions about the woman of the house's ethnic origins, affixing a mental asterisk to my previous notions about white cringe, Tao nudges me and points. Underneath the frame is a fist-sized hole in the drywall. We checked the logs to see if this was declared as nighttime collateral. It wasn't. It isn't our job to confront the property owner about things like this, but we record it as a possible anomaly so the system can start a welfare inquisition and send social workers if such action is deemed appropriate. I carefully remount the picture as at its previously uneven angle. My ITAP gives one suggestion based on latent saccadic data, but I adjust that exactly 3 degrees because OCD do be odd like that. While I'm nudging it into position, I recall a story about a ninja lord down south, territory of the Gulf or some other sultry mosquito scape, who met his wife and her squad of guardians in a nighttime showdown, inside the very house where he whooped her ass the previous morning. During the daytime dispute, this absolute Chad, who had been beset by a powerful fury or whatever euphemism they used to excuse toxic masculinity down there, punched a huge hole in his man cave's wall. The story goes that the battle was a narrow victory for the sisters. Supposedly, he was a good old boy who kept his castle, a culture war era's replica antebellum plantation house, in pristine condition. Our teams hadn't gotten there yet for feng shui readjustment, probably due to mutant gators or ball lightning, whatever inhuman fucking natural conditions exist in Dixieland. This was an incredibly strong ninja, chi potential in the millions, and he was only barely overcome by a massive coalition effort. That hole he punched in the wall may have cost him the battle. It may have saved his wife and children's lives. That story, I don't know, the feels for days. It doesn't take long for Tao and I to move the bed out of its command position into a less optimal one. It seems like the dog has pissed on the sheets recently, which is great. An empty can of Skull Wintergreen being used as an ashtray sits on the vanity, perched atop a bag filled with mini rolled cigarettes. I consider emptying it onto the carpet, but before I can, Tao snatches it up with the grace and ferocity of Pai Mei plucking out Ellie's eye, and hurls it with an irate guttural vocalization. In seconds, its contents are adorning the master bathroom's door, and part of the checkered flag shower curtain. I don't ask Tao if she's okay. I remember her confiding in me that her grandmother had died somewhat recently of treatable mouth cancer, and I don't really see any point in going there right now, so I just stoop down and tie my Timbs. The next few moments is us checking our social media tattoos in silence. I swipe down my left wrist, banishing a tsundere match, which leads me to fixate indefinitely on an undefined pink splatter on my gi cuff. Time resumes around me when Tao acknowledges that she's pretty much satisfied with our work here. It isn't quite Zhongsai classification, but it's close. Zhongsai, or haunted house category, is the lofty goal of all homemakers or home wreckers. A haunted site is basically an energy vortex, a cursed shithole where vital chi goes to die. In most cases, we don't have the time to fuck a place up that bad. Today, the spirits must have been on our side. To be fair, this house was very big. I doubt that 2 people could keep it tidy even if they wanted to. It's 11:10. As we pass through the liminal corridor back into the foyer, matron in tow, I notice 2 sets of Adirondack chairs, each with a different colored cushion. I inquire about them. Oh, she beams. This Amish dude made them for our family. They're really friggin' cute. You should have him make one more, Tao says. Oh? Even bad, odd good. Ah, gotcha. Done. We wanted another one anyway. It's unreal how comfortable they are. Outside, the ice and snow are turning all the trees into grayish skeletons, seasonally relevant successors to the pockets of plastic Halloween decorations that are rapidly being covered up. Skies are overcast, menacing. Tao finishes up the paperwork underneath Quantaglow front porch Christmas lights that probably haven't seen their original packaging in decades. The last forms are all medical follow-up stuff for the hematology techs. Energy stagnation negatively impacts every living thing in the household, albeit its effect on ninja is exponentially more significant. So all the occupants, adult male and residents aside, will receive nano boosters to make sure they're in top shape. I have to marvel at the fact that science has advanced to the point where we can tackle spiritual quandaries using technology. Bad juju and negative energy are no match for the power of the quantum. Cheers, Tao shouts to the homeowners. Another astral finish, Teokaka, I say, attempting to get one last rise out of my partner by comparing her to my favorite BlazBlue Rushdown queen. She shakes her head and strikes a pose that captures the spirit, if not the glory, of Teokaka's storied taunt move. She's played the game twice at my apartment. I forgive her. When all the residents, Fido included, are safely outside, we clock out, throwing 2 of the biggest cuckoos through the front window. We leave the rest strewn about the lawn, accompanying the rusted snowmobile parts, chicken wire, and ice-shrouded animal cages, then responsibly cordon off the broken glass with caution tape. The end.
Man, I've already talked to you about this piece, so I don't want to go on too long, but I really, really dig the way the world building works in this. Like the really outlandish sci-fi shit mixed with the uh hyper attentive to detail like stuff about life in the North Country mixed with the mysticism and the feng shui stuff. Like it's really fantastically unique, a fantastically unique setting. And also I appreciate how completely integrated that stuff is in the story. Like a lot of times, and you're just as aware of this as I am, but like in sci-fi books and fantasy books, there'll be setting dumps, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, the next 5 pages are the author expounding on the setting. And here, instead of doing that, it's really well integrated with the action. So you always feel and also it's kept at just the right level of calibration, so the reader is always kind of fascinated and pulled forward and never stumped or bored by it. So I don't know, I just think that the whole way the piece is structured and the world building stuff is integrated is really great.
Oh, cool. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And also, I just want to say Amir for adult male in residence is just such a such a beautiful, perfect acronym.
And king
It's so
shit,
in
right? I
keeping
mean,
with the story. Yeah, Brandon, I think you're up next. And after Brandon, I think it will be open mic. I think Andy, you had already sent me a message earlier saying that you wanted to participate in the open mic, right? Yes, okay. So if anyone else wants to read during the open mic, you can just drop something in the chat while Brandon's reading, and Rudy and I will kind of try to keep dibs on the chat. And yeah. Okay, B-Boy, you ready to roll?
I'm ready. All right. Just kind of as an aside here, if anyone else has an adult beverage ready, when I'm done reading, I would appreciate if you would take a drink with me. That'll make a little bit more sense when I actually get started here. So this is an autobiographical piece, and hopefully it doesn't get people too bummed out. My uncle died the other night. That's hard enough to handle on its own. It's a reminder that mortality is coming closer to hand. My grandparents weren't easy to say goodbye to, don't get me wrong, but there was a whole generation in between to buffer the reality of life and death for me in my early 20s. That buffer's gone now. The reaper is nigh. He was the only biological uncle that I knew that I had growing up, and frankly, it's not easy for me to remember that the other two exist since I only met them at my grandfather's funeral 15 years ago to the day. I'd call that an indictment of my family, but really I had spent the previous decade disconnected, so it could easily have been something that came to light in my teenage years. We weren't close, but hearing your stepmother yelling at your father in the hallway while you sit on the living room floor with your sister, basically telling him that he had to choose one child or the other, will do that. You might be wondering what any of that has to do with my uncle, and rightly so. The core of it is that growing up, I had very few male role models in my family to look at, let alone look up to. I saw my father less than 5 times a year on average for the first decade of my life. I had 2 older aunts that were both divorced and a younger aunt that was only 15 years older than I was. One grandfather had bailed on my grandmother before I was born, so my uncle and my father's father were the only ones that I had for those formative years. My grandfather was awesome. Korean War veteran, though he was stationed in Germany. Postman, National Guard Reserve, generally well liked everywhere he went. My grandparents on that side were the glue that held that family together. My grandmother wouldn't let the family fall apart, and my grandfather always made people want to be there. He was one of those people that you just knew had lived as soon as you met him, and that still had so much life left inside him. And he was the heart of the family. He was also an alcoholic, but He was the happy kind, and really that's all I could ask for with the rest of the drinkers in my bloodline. Not all of them were as pleasant. My uncle was someone that I was never very close to growing up, but he was always around. It was just kind of his way. Every time I'd be over at his house, I'd be spending time with my cousins off to the side while the adults all stuck together. It was probably the most traditional thing in my family, honestly. Very old school. I almost drowned in his pool at my 3rd birthday party, too. That wasn't his fault. My father should have been watching more closely, but we'll get to him in a bit here. The older I got, the more old school I realized my uncle was. He was a CO and used to tell stories about chaining inmates at the wrists and ankles and sending them tripping down flights of stairs. Not to mention the racist jokes that I won't repeat here. And yet, he was still more of a role model for me than my father will ever be. See, my father split when I was 3 months old. I'm told it was because he wanted to bring me to the bar with him and my grandfather, and my mother and her mother said absolutely fucking not. I doubt that they said fucking. That's just for dramatic purposes. I actually never heard that grandmother swear, and she didn't even like the word fart. He remarried when I was 2. I had a sister when I was 3. I was clashing heads with my stepmother by 5 and barely visited him by 7. I don't know when they divorced. I was too young, but by 12, when they had that fateful shouting match, I knew I'd had enough and wanted nothing to do with it. Then my grandfather died when I was 21. I reconnected with the family, met the half-uncles I'd never known about, played poker with them all for that first time. Had my first bad drinking experience with Jose Cuervo Silver because I hadn't quite figured out that not all liquors hit the way whiskey does. I have fond memories of that game. Of my uncle sending his wife and my aunt to go on a liquor run and saying, now that all the women are gone, let's play some real poker. Of me taking that as an opportunity to bluff him out of a $15 pot with a jack deuce offsuit. He had pocket queens. Of him getting agitated after I revealed the bluff and asking where his wife was. I have good memories of a few years down the line talking to him about something that a friend of mine was struggling with at the time. I don't even remember what or who or why. I remember that his advice was drive your own truck. Very old school. Very straightforward and to the point. I didn't see eye to eye with his politics or prejudices, but he was honest and I could respect that. And I still can't respect my father. Even after we reconnected and it seemed like we were genuinely bonding again, it was fine for a few years, actually. I'd stop in when doing my long walks through town. We'd sit and talk. It was good. Then he retired. I went to that retirement party, and it was the first time I had ever seen a parent smoke a joint in a hotel room. Priceless memories, right? Not like I hadn't smoked with my aunt from time to time for a few years prior to that. Felt good having a father in my life. Then one day I found out he'd sold his house and moved to Florida without a word. Fuck me, right? That was maybe 2014. I think that fits the timeline right. Sometime in there, my uncle wound up cheating on his wife with some woman he met online, also in Florida, 20 years younger than he was. We all stayed connected on Facebook. Then the 2016 election came around. I remember making a post trying to see if anyone I knew genuinely thought Trump was a good idea. My father did. I deleted him. We hadn't talked since he moved to Florida, but that was the last time there was any contact at all. I'd gotten a happy birthday message through Facebook once, apologizing for being such a shitty father. I left that shit unreceived. I found out about my uncle from a friend whose father is my father's best friend, the same day that he died. Our fathers have been talking on the phone. I'm not surprised that was how I'd find out. What did surprise me was the next day while I was at work on my lunch break. I got a phone call from a number I don't know. I let it ring. I always do. I get a text message saying that it's Dad. Give me a call when you can. I left it unreceived. It's been 6 years. Losing a male role model brought the family back together last time. It's not worth it this time. Not like I can call him back and say, I already know. Not without a need to say the rest. Not without a need to say, did your sister make you make the call, or did you finally manage to actually grow a fucking pair? Not without a need to say, what do you think you're getting out of this? Lose a brother, regain a son? Not without a need to call him out on all the bullshit, all the absentee shit, all the missed birthdays and holidays and milestones. Not without the temptation to echo one of the greatest things my uncle ever said, even though I wouldn't really mean it. Do you know where to find sympathy? It's right there in the dictionary, between shit and syphilis. Rest in peace, Uncle Brad.
F for Uncle Brad. F's in the chat for Uncle Brad, I guess. No, man, that was some tremendously real fucking shit. And thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely real. I that part with your grandma. I mean, obviously, I knew your grandmother, and that sequence there, just it made me see her face. That was so like her and her little dog, Tilly. I just man, that was good. I really like that, and I appreciate how it winds down into a kind of into the conclusion. That basically, I thought it was a good outro because it's not too. I mean, the joke, the syphilis and the sympathy thing. The sympathy joke was just great. Perfect way to end it. I think that's a good way to wind things down.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm with you, Rudy. I don't want to like offer. It feels weird to critique a eulogy. But no, I do appreciate that. It seems like it feels like it's going to a place of like sympathy, right, and reconciliation, and instead, it goes someplace far darker. I appreciated that.
That was definitely cool.
Yeah. So I think now it's open mic time. I know. Tell me if I missed anyone. I have Andy, I have Sam, I have Tyler, and sorry, I know someone else offered just a second ago in the chat too.
I think David was
David.
the most
Yeah.
recent one.
So is that everyone? Andy,
Oh, it looks like Amanda's jumping in too.
David, and Amanda. Okay, so that's awesome. So that's 5. And people can, if someone else would like to read, feel free to just mention it in the chat. We'll try to keep up with everyone. But Andy did offer, I think, way at the beginning of the night, so we'll start with him.
Oops, I'm sorry. I think Amanda may have not been referencing that, but instead weed.
Well, Amanda, if you do, well, you're last in the queue right now. So if you do decide you're up to it when we get to you, that's fine. If you're not, that's totally cool too.
We're definitely down for the weed reading, though. I mean, man, that.
I took an edible, so it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. It definitely would not be the first time somebody read it, one of these things while high as fuck. So
it wouldn't.
Not by a long shot. So, Andy, you're up first.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this reading an open mic. Yeah, I got this small piece. Working on it. It's called Fruit Fly. Can you guys hear me? I'm outside.
Yeah, I can hear you pretty clearly. You're just a little tiny bit quiet, but not. It's not anything that makes you hard to hear or anything.
I'm a quiet person. I'll try to raise my voice though.
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay. After Morgan dipped out, the fruit fly moved into my apartment. Today it hung out in the living room and crashing on the sofa in the early afternoon while I did office work on my laptop. I typed in a Word document as the fruit fly snored and whistled a jazz tune in its sleep. When it woke up, it flew around in my kitchen and nibbled on the bruised Bartlett pears from my glass bowl as I smoked the joint on the balcony and watched it suck the juices out the fruit. It looked at me and grinned, and I stared at my feet. They were covered in ash. I went inside and closed the sliding glass door, looking up as the fruit fly hovered on top of the room near the ceiling fan, rotating back and forth. I wish it would get sliced by the fan, turning into bits and pieces, but instead it weaved in and out of the wooden panels as it spun around in slow circles. And it landed on the Formica countertop and laid on its stomach, blowing snot bubbles. I went into the bathroom and sat on the toilet with my sweatpants around my ankles. I was constipated. Maybe this was why Morgan left me. Maybe I had a lot of problems. Just a lot of problems. And I didn't have any answers. What I had was that fruit fly. I washed my hands with hot water and soap, and when I went back into the living room, the fruit fly was dry humping a plum in my wicker basket. I rushed back to the bathroom, got on my knees, sucked my finger down my throat, and puked out my guts. When I stepped back into the living room, the fruit fly was making love to the plum with passion. It was thrusting back and forth and moaning. I opened the front door and told it to get out. It kept licking the plum, sucking on its fruit. I cleared my throat and opened the door wider. Please go, I said. I looked at it with its Coke bottle eyes and sneered. It spat on the carpet and flipped me off. It called me a prude and mooned me. I went into the storage closet and grabbed the fly swatter, and then I ran back into the living room, swinging at the fruit fly. I smacked it and it launched against the window, sliding down the glass until it hit the ground. I walked over to it, looking down at it. The fruit fly looked up at me and rolled on the carpet to the left, dropping into the air vent, escaping. I got on the ground and reached over to get it, watching it fall into a dark well. I stood up, walked over to the couch, and sat down. My phone started ringing on the coffee table. I curled up against the cushions and stared out the window, looking at the fragmented construction site, the raindrops spilling on the concrete. I fell asleep. I dreamt that I was laying on the ground, getting hit in the face by plums, big and small, ripe and rotten, like getting teabagged. I woke up on the couch, drenched with sweat, my breath shallow. I went to my bedroom, did 2 lines of K off my phone, and smoked a bowl. When I was feeling high, I stepped back into the living room and giggled. I giggled and giggled and giggled. The fruit fly was flipping pancakes in the kitchen, whistling a familiar jazz tune, something like Bird or Miles. The apartment smelling like chocolate chips and bananas. I pulled up a chair and sat at the long marble island. I stared at my hands and breathed in deeply. Look, I'm sorry I hit you, I said. I shouldn't have done that, but you also shouldn't be fucking a plum in the common area. You just don't do that, you know what I mean? Can you understand me? You speak English? The fruit fly poured orange juice into 2 glasses and gave me one. As it leaned back against the countertop, it drank the juice and it poured orange juice into 2 glasses and gave me one. As it leaned back against its countertop, it drank the juice and clicked its teeth. I get it. I'm sorry. That won't happen again, I promise. I nodded and thought to myself, this is some good drugs I got. Appreciate that, I said. Anything else? It asked. Anything else? It asked. I thought about it for a moment and said, you need to help out with rent. How? It asked. With money. Haven't you ever paid rent? I asked. It shook its head. I'm a fruit fly. What's money? After I explained the concept of money to the fruit fly, I rolled a joint with some papers and mediocre weed. I coughed out smoke and passed the joint to the fruit fly. It did a big hit and made a smoke cloud. Why'd you try to kill me? It asked. I grabbed the joint and took another hit and sighed. I wasn't trying to kill you, man. I was trying to stun you. I'm sorry. Again. Stun me with the fly swatter? I could have died. Like dead. I thought about it for a moment, and the fruit fly was right. I almost killed it, but I didn't. That's all I got.
That was hilarious. I love like how it just keeps getting more and more absurd. Like how it goes from like relative realism to like having a flat out conversation with the fruit fly and the fruit fly cooking pancakes. That was the moment I just totally fucking lost it was when the fruit fly started making pancakes in the kitchen. There's something so like human about that, and so like just tremendous.
Yeah, pancakes are great. You know, they're yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks
Yeah,
for
I'm looking at the chat here, and it looks like pretty much everyone was losing their shit too. So I think, yeah. Um,
appreciate you having me. That was thank you.
yeah, great. Thank you for reading. Thank you very much for reading. Next up, I think Sam's up next. Are you with us, Sam? I hope I didn't
Yep.
skip anyone. I'm trying to hold the queue together in my head, and I'm not totally with it tonight.
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool, cool. It's all yours.
All right, this is called A Dentist Most Terribly Punished. Ask them questions with your hands in their mouth was all it took. A joke suggestion from a colleague. It took your entire life so far to get here. Multiple, no, numerous all-nighters. Where on top of your course load, you added MCAT and pre-DAT, TDAT practice exams, extracurricular practice courses, Habitat for Humanity volunteering, Sunday schools teaching, etc., all while maintaining a pristine driving and social record. Your resume undervalued you simply because that by representing you, you who are more than pristine were reduced to a mere representation. You would have been accepted to any medicinal or surgical or nursing related graduate program to which you would have deemed worthy of your application. Dentistry made sense. You are a musician, after all. Stable, articulate hands. Hands guided by a stable, articulate man from a stable, unconditionally loving family embedded in a stable, unconditionally self-embedded community and church. Hands that are cool in uncomfortable spaces. Hands that have large demands placed on them each time you, the one that guides those hands, picks up a guitar, a mandolin, or ukulele, or any stringed instrument that has frets. Hands that are tools. Hands that can certainly be relied upon to accomplish a task as simple as pulling out a tooth or putting a tooth where it is supposed to go. Again, guided by a mind that is certainly able to forefront the knowledge of where those hands can and cannot cut with a scalpel. Hands that people trust to be inside their mouths when they are fully conscious or under the needle. Hands that got you through dental school and then guided you through your additional masters in periodontology with a dancer's leading grace. Ask them questions when you were checking their gums, he said. You were in a study group. You sat with it, unknowingly, for years, when one day you asked, "How are the kids?" "They're doing what?" "Please don't talk. It makes my job more difficult." The lamplight had already dotted their pupils. Their eyebrows sharpened to a V for a moment, then inverted, before finally relaxing. A look of anger that then dissolved into helpless confusion and then defeat, as their face reflexively congealed around your left index and left thumb, which were placed in such a manner as to enable full view of the top right canine and lower right bicuspid. A fit of laughter you could only suppress by letting your face crack behind your mask to a look of open-mouthed, psychotic glee. You were hiding in your office, laughing almost silently, so out of breath when your assistant came to inform of cancellation. Thank God. You told her you were doing lumbar stretches when she saw you on the floor, and that you were going to take lunch. That mask cracked right when the door closed. Your higher motor and emotional functions either suppressed by or simply being redirected towards the experience of this meta-ironic, gleefully destructive joy. You'd barely gotten through the standard operating procedure, which, incidentally, was typed up from boilerplate by that same assistant for all new hires to read and memorize. The rest of your workday passed without incident. It wasn't until night that the guilt came. This had been a total abuse of your privilege as a medical professional. An intentional abuse, evident even to your most naive moral sense. Until now, most nights you slept with greed, with thirst, parched and exhausted from your day, and unbothered by any minor quips from your conscience. Until now. Tonight you dreamt of your place in the universe. Tonight your conscience, that naive moral sense, held the reins and was going to guide those usually loosely related, easily forgotten nighttime images in a way that you could only describe as an emotional ass fucking. You saw the clockwork universe, the inner workings of it built with precision. That in regards to the sig figs or zeros or decimal places that were factored into each calculation by whatever deity designed it, could only be ballpark represented with transcendental numbers. Everything rule-bound and non-contradictory and even non-contrary, a best of all possible realities up until you zoomed out from yourself in bed and saw everything. 30 years, 30 rotations on the tiny blue dot around the less tiny yellow dot, around the less tiny hole in space-time, around the even less tiny hole in space-time, the most significant part of which was you, whose significance was shown to be the inverse of your size. You who, free-willed, yet informed by your moral intuition, decided to ignore that information and intentionally knocked all of that ever so slightly off its axis, entailing consequences more and more dire the more you project into the future. Would these be your nights now? Yes, they would. But anyway, since it's too late to turn any of that back now, might as well do it again. Maybe even do it to every patient. It could be fun. That's it.
First of all, I actually just saw the dentist for the first time in, I don't know, like fucking years earlier this week. So that piece hit maybe harder for me than it would have otherwise. But no, I really appreciate the way that piece takes like this single tiny moral trespass and like from there builds this entire like sense of like moral collapse, right? That's really like when someone's life is that like fantastically rigid and structured and they make that one little ethical breach and the whole fucking edifice falls apart. I don't know, I just love the way you presented that.
Thank you. I thought it's kind of David Foster Wallace-y, but I make it my own by doing it clumsily.
No, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and I actually didn't think of DFW at all. Although, granted, I haven't read much of his stuff. It's always like I started and then I read a little bit, and then I'm like, I feel like I don't need to read this anymore for a while.
I'm a huge DFW stan, so.
Yeah. So next up, is Tyler next, or we've got Tyler, David, Amanda, and Dawson, I believe, right, Rudy?
Yeah, I think Tyler is up. He was gonna read or play a song.
Okay.
I think I'll just read tonight.
You even have the guitar behind you, though.
You got it right there.
This is where they live. I mean, if it's overwhelming support, then I'll play another song, but otherwise.
Why don't you read first, and maybe you can do a song as an encore. Let's leave it up to the chat. Maybe.
Yeah, okay. Like I said, I just finished this story about an hour ago. Do you want me to drop it in a paste bucket so you
No,
can
no,
post
I
the link or whatever?
I don't think if you want me to be able to post a link, you can. But if you want to just read it, that's fine. I only really need the link when it's a scheduled reading kind of thing. So I can
Okay.
Twitter.
All right. Well, I will just read it then. I haven't come up with a title for this yet, even. Okay, there it is. The traffic on the interstate nearby was giving off a steady rumbling drone. If not for that, Michaela could have easily believed they were miles deep in the wilderness. There wasn't any path to speak of, and the encircling trees drew in close, erasing anything city-like from view, hugging the moist air with its heavy, leafy smell inward and concentrating it into a wet, rotten, unwholesome miasma that barreled into the nose, an effect which only intensified in the occasional clearings where the sun pulled steamy air up from the hot, stinking clumps of grass. Michaela felt like a soaked dog. Sweat ran down her spine and collected at the small of her back, where it dripped steadily between her buttocks. Her collar was as soaked as if she'd been obsessively chewing on it. Her dark hair hung in lank ropes behind each ear. Betty called out to her from behind a knot of trees. "Anything?" "Nothing," returned Michaela. Honestly, she had no idea what she was meant to be doing out here. Granted, this wasn't much wilderness, but she wasn't a person well suited to any amount of it. They were still in city limits, but nonetheless, she had totally lost her bearings and hovered nervously close to Betty. Her mind swam with alarming scenes of getting totally lost and their phones failing and having to camp out overnight. Strained nerves made Michaela start to babble. "What was it wearing?" she asked. Betty was treading carefully through a dip in the ground filled with prairie grass so tall she couldn't tell where the bottom was. "It had a harness on, purple, he said," she said. "And what did it look like?" asked Michaela. Betty cleared the grass and peeked around a huge hickory trunk. "It looked like an iguana," she said. "Yeah, duh," sighed Michaela. "I was just wondering if it had any distinctive markings or whatever." "So we can tell it apart from all the other iguanas out here?" said Betty. "Just keep your eyes peeled, you'll see it." That's what they had both thought at first, and had said as much to the performer who'd lost the animal. He'd brought it to the fair as a dragon as part of his act, and of course the goddamn thing ran away. The whole thing was so ridiculous. He'd printed up the iguana's picture on flyers that said "Lost Dragon" and posted them all around the fair. People thought it was a gag, so he'd had to print up more explicit flyers. "Don't worry," Betty had said. "I know these whole grounds, and we'll definitely find him." She knew the grounds because she was on the fair committee. Michaela wasn't. She just made jewelry for Betty's store. She'd given her enough pieces this year that Betty had convinced her she needed to come to fair and help her sell them. "Pretty much partners now," Betty had said. It didn't appeal to Michaela, as the fair was taking place during record-breaking heat this year, but she said yes anyway. And then this shit happened. And this brush patch they said they'd easily be able to comb through in a jiffy had turned out a lot larger and gnarlier than they'd counted on. There was undergrowth everywhere, thick mats of dead leaves and humus sitting in random holes and dips and ravines, perfect for an enterprising reptile to hide inside. And not only that, but the woods were crammed full of animals. Michaela could hardly believe how many. Snakes and chipmunks and squirrels and birds and even a skunk. And the worst part was she never found them until they exploded out of their hiding places and tore ass away, scaring her to death. Thus, her hopes of actually finding the iguana on purpose grew smaller and smaller. Now her goal was to put in just enough steps to say she tried and make it out alive. In a house along nearby Astoria Street, 77-year-old Emma Battaglia couldn't sleep. Her husband Ernie had gone to bed hours ago. Emma didn't seem to have the knack for it tonight. She had laid her head down upon the pillow and then just plain couldn't make the next part happen. Your body did such strange things when you were old. Emma rose from the bed and got into her slippers. She decided to do some baking to pass the time. Every time she baked something out of the blue, Ernie grumbled that she was going to kill him with all this sugar, but he always ate it anyway. What a silly thing to be concerned about, she thought. He was looking so spindly these days. She'd thicken him up a little if she could help it. Emma leafed through her recipe book looking for inspiration. She was having trouble putting the letters together. Everything she tried to read looked only intermittently like a word. The symbols were all there, but she had to concentrate hard to make the reference appear flickeringly in her mind's eye, like the picture in one of those old magic eye paintings. Emma was unperturbed. Her brain was simply foggy from one or more of her medications. She snapped the book shut and settled on snickerdoodles, which was one of her old standbys. She'd made them so many times she couldn't muck it up if she tried. First, Emma sifted the necessary amount of flour into a bowl. Then she went to the pantry and got out the other dry ingredients, baking soda and brown and white sugar and cinnamon and molasses and baking powder and soda. But when it came time to soften a stick of butter in the microwave, Emma discovered that there was no butter in the fridge. The only butter in the house was in the dish on the table, and it was at least half used. Emma frowned. She looked out the window. Her mother's voice began to ring in her ears. "Emma, honey," said her mother, "would you please run down the street and buy me a stick of butter?" A memory flooded Emma's mind of herself, skipping down the sunny street with coins jingling in her hand. Without further ado, Emma grabbed her wallet from her purse on the table and walked out the door in her nightgown and headed straight down the dark street towards the corner store. The sun was behind the trees now, and the air was starting to get a little bit cooler. Now that Michaela wasn't actively melting, another sensation was climbing to the front of her brain. She had to pee, really badly. She was embarrassed. There was no reason for her to be embarrassed. They'd both been gulping water from their canteens. Nonetheless, she was embarrassed as hell. She was ready to give up and head to a bathroom somewhere, but she didn't want to do it without Betty's assent. She didn't quite know how to ask her. Betty was still as determined as ever to find that iguana. She was striding confidently in front of Michaela, pushing piles of dead leaves aside with her foot in case the iguana was there, standing underneath the trees and peering sharply up into the branches. Michaela was following her pigeon-footed. Her nerves had reached downward out of her brain and gripped her bladder and squeezed it to beat the band. She looked at Betty silently. The necessary words jumped into Michaela's mouth but wouldn't come out. She tapped her fingers along tree trunks urgently. She began looking longingly at big tree trunks she might take a quick squat behind, wondered if she could pull off a quick piss without Betty noticing. She had a terrible fear that Betty would yell at her for peeing. Every passing moment made her sure that she would have to risk it. Finally, Michaela made her decision. There was a slight swell in the landscape. Betty had already gone over it, and her whole lower body was hidden from view behind it. Michaela ducked behind and to the left while unbuttoning her shorts. She nervously cast a look over her shoulder with her shorts already halfway down her ass when she tripped on a tree root and got pitched forward and fell into an uncontrollable tumble down the slope of the ravine. It wasn't a particularly hard tumble, but it was scary. She rolled like a hot dog all the way down and came to rest in a depression full of wet, partially rotten leaves. Betty found her like that with her ass half exposed. Michaela sat up dizzy and discombobulated and noted with displeasure that she dribbled into her underwear a little. She felt like crying. Her hand was brushing something soft, some kind of cloth. Michaela grabbed the portion next to her hand. It was cottony material characteristic of sleepwear. A nightgown, perhaps. Emma was starting to get the sense that something had gone wrong on the way to the store. The corner store wasn't where it was supposed to be. Of course, the store couldn't be there because it existed over 60 years ago in a different town than she was currently in. This fact flew around the top of her brain like a bat. She nonetheless really felt like it ought to be there. Some sort of terrible mistake had been made. She was walking along the crumbling shoulder of an unfamiliar road. The streetlights were tall and huge and threw pools of light along the smooth and entirely vacant blacktop. Acorns and broken off bits of asphalt crunched beneath her feet. They hurt. Despite the warmth of the night, Emma felt chilly in her thin nightgown. Emma heard a sudden crunch of twigs. She saw something dart along the shoulder just out of the sight from the street lamps. It looked for all the world like her friend Nadine Berquist's cat. Nadine loved that cat. Her father often left the door unlatched, because he was drunk all the time, Emma had realized later in life. And poor Nadine would worry herself sick about that cat whenever it got out. It always came home eventually, but one time its tail was neatly broken off at the second to last segment. Nadine howled and howled over that tail, even though the cat didn't seem to mind. Since then, she'd instructed Emma that if she ever saw the cat out and about, she was to scoop it up and bring it straight back to her house. Well, Emma wasn't going to let her down. She followed the cat along the road. The cat detected Emma walking behind her and sped up. Emma started to hoof it to catch up. Her old knees began to ache. The cat took a left turn and disappeared into a line of trees. Emma sighed. Without a second thought on the matter, she pushed into the woods after the cat. After she'd walked in a straight line for a few minutes, stepping over logs and feeling the telltale poke of sticker burrs on her old papery skin, Emma couldn't see or hear the cat anywhere anymore. Neither could she detect where she came in. The vegetation grew in thick, and the light issuing from the headlamps on the road was only fairly detectable. Emma stopped to think. She tried to remember why she had left the house in the first place. A stick of butter, she remembered. But why was she after a stick of butter from the corner store? Her mother couldn't be cooking anything because she'd been dead for 38 years. So then why was she out here? Emma began to get scared. Her mind wasn't working right. She needed to get back home to Ernie right away. He would know what to do. She turned around and began walking toward the dim light she saw through the trees, but she hadn't gotten more than a few steps before her foot sank into some animal's burrow. Emma's ankle snapped instantly. She fell backward into a pile of dry leaves, which should have broken her fall, except on her way down, she fell over a log, breaking her hip, and also hit her head on another log that happened to be there. Hot liquid pain flooded through Emma's midsection. Emma's head rang with pain and confusion. She cried out, strange, gasping cries. Ah! 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 She lay like that, crying out inarticulately until she thought her throat was going to give out. A gigantic lizard in a purple harness came out to inspect the source of the noise. It stared at her with beady orange eyes that caught the light. It flicked its tongue out as if testing the air for something. She was now convinced she was going batty. Emma cried out even more. A voice flew to Emma through the trees. The noise drove the lizard away. The voice was barely audible through the thick growth, but Emma's panicked ears picked it up clear as a bell. Emma, she heard. Emma, sweetie, are you okay? Where are you? Emma could hardly believe herself. Her mother wasn't dead after all. She was coming to rescue her. I'm right here, Mom, she yelled. Quickly! In no time at all, Emma's mother appeared before her. She sat down on the log and ran soothing fingers through Emma's white curls. Oh, honey, this is terrible. How did you get yourself into this mess, poor thing? Emma began bawling. Tears of relief streamed down her crumpled cheeks. She kept on sobbing to such extent that she soaked her mother's dress as she scooped Emma up in the crook of her arm and carried her away. That's it.
Wow. The way that piece escalates is really amazing to me. Like the way the stakes go up and up and up, and you think you're listening to this kind of comic story about these two people looking for a lost iguana, and then it becomes about dementia, and I don't know. That's wild. That's wild. I love the way that piece is structured. And it really caught me off guard. And it also feels authentic in that it doesn't, like, that's the way life feels when you're experiencing it, right? It goes from kind of trivial to comic to suddenly tragic, and there's no way to separate the like trivial from the profound. So no, I really dug that piece, man.
Thank you.
Now, are you going to play something for us?
Oh God. I suppose I can if there's no objection. Is there anyone ahead of me?
I think there are three people left: David, Amanda, and Dawson. If you want, you know what? How about I let them read and then you can play us out at the end? How about that?
Yeah,
Oh,
sure
man.
thing.
David, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool. It's all yours.
Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Let me just get this. This is it's like a prose poem that I've been working on intermittently when I'm not too drunk or sad to do anything productive.
I
It's
hear that.
It is called I mean, at least the working title, it's probably going to be the actual title, is Blood Ties. A body can be a jail cell, all the more constricting the more one moves around. In distant deserts and thick woods, and in the middle of the wide open sea, in the deepest, darkest regions of space, and in my dreams, my blood has found me and left me cowering in the corner behind the bars of my veins. I'm forced, freely, to traverse this never-ending finite void I've been thrown into by the calloused hands of the god of thunder, and strapped down by an iron anchor birthed from the forge of Hephaestus. Every step one takes is an extension on the leash of one's bloodline, tugging at their carotid collar. I am interred in a four-limbed cement room. It is held together by a shibari net in which I am enmeshed with complete strangers. Marionette strings from a mighty hand, two fingers capable of grasping a child's still developing skull, slither forth through the ether and into my skin. They wrap around, whisper white lies to my soul via my aortic valve, prying it open with malice as potent as the arsenic at the bottom of the sugar bowl. We are but product and party to the one-sided bargain of birth. I am tied to blood I owe responsibility and allegiance to, acting, speaking, thinking in its name. A tradition as ancient as the human race, like many, outliving its time. My jailers have painted the cell in vibrant colors, decorated it with trinkets to make me smile like an infant or a pet. Just by their giving, I agreed to pay interest on a debt as heavy as a human life. I failed to read the fine print with my antediluvian eyes. Beware of Krauts and Polacks bearing gifts. Debt holds so many things together. States and families are all kept whole, tight at the noose's knot. It keeps this triangle stable. Its tip presses down upon the small of my back, keeping it upright. At night, I peer through the bars of this cell, or am I peering into them? I inhale and travel alongside the oxygen that passes to and fro our gray matter. I can see into their dreams at night as they begrudgingly sleep next to each other, back to back. They must feel my presence. They must feel my rage, my hatred. The only use for this connection. I take a blade and I can feel their panic as I take it to these chains. Madly slashing, they cry out with their forked tongues, tears escaping from their nictitating membranes. Why am I doing this, they ask. They have given me so much. What more could I want? I respond with a cry of my own. I drown out these sugary lies with a scream so powerful that the foundations of my prison tremble before it. The barriers of my cell are about to burst. It is then that the masks fall from their faces. They know that the charade no longer holds any use for them for the moment. Their tongues tense up into a spear and point towards me. Their tears dry up so fast even the salt vanishes from their cheeks without a trace. In their combined power, they produce a scream of authentic anger directly from the recesses of their bowels. Their fangs glisten. In the moonlight, I almost think they're still smiling. I'm engulfed in my roots. This liquid flows through me like a plague on the winds of feudal Europe, like a swarm of vermin and the microbes that inhabit them. It congeals at my throat, coagulates into a crimson millstone. I will go and walk down a path, one of your own making, completely blind down to the Red Sea, carrying this weight. Why am I doing this? Is it out of faith in your rule? Am I a knight in your charge? With every step I take on the path, the meaning of the journey is left behind, vaporized. There's a ship docked at the wharf. There are many ships roiling in the sea. They can barely maintain their balance at the edge of this coming maelstrom. I will get on, for that is my destiny. The orders were never spoken to me. No message carried on air slipped between dancing lips and tongue to say, go out to sea, all must do so. Go, Crusoe, find an island to make your own out there, somewhere in that infinity. I go down this path as an infant in a straw cradle down a river. If I look back through these roots, I find a path of broken glass and eggshells, a blood trail from a wound shrouded in a darkness of the shade of Tartarus. I look down at my feet to find my flesh torn apart. My soul is laid bare to the bone. The path is meandering. At times, traces of only the balls of my feet can be perceived. I must get down on my hands and knees to notice that I have even traversed this path with only the tips of my toes. But these tracks that I find behind me are not only mine. They cannot be. One too large, the other too small. I feel a wetness on the back of my neck. I can map the lines of your soul better than a print card. I can do it with my eyes poked out of their sockets and my arms dislocated. This is how we are connected. Distance does not matter with the bottom of your boot stitched at the base of my head. Was it ever anywhere else? The line between them grows more meaningless by the second. Every foot planted on the dirt lets me know where you are, no matter where the sun shines on the earth below. Can it be anywhere else? The vibrations could travel through an ocean as it devoured the land it bordered. It would part in your presence by the motion of your advances towards my being. You always know where I am, don't you? It would freeze over, and as your veins would tear through like cracks the sky would tear open. You will always find me, won't you? Gore would spill out onto the masquerade below, through this veil I wear on my face like a tarp over a still-to-be-dug grave. Tendrils of stringy flesh and vein forcing their way down my throat, and those calloused fingers, they pull with so much power you can almost feel with your deadened nerves. They grip so hard, I can almost feel your heartbeat. This red liquid, like wine after a filicidal struggle, has flown all throughout this room, this home, this town and county, this state, this country has been covered by your deoxyribonucleic acidic presence. It has sprayed everywhere, corroded all that it touches, my clothes, my books, my past, my present, my future. A scent lingers on all that my blood has infected. It refuses to not be known. It reminds me of its presence every moment, waking and unwaking. It reminds me in everything it has stained. Without it, as it claims, I would have nothing. I would be nothing. I cannot deny what it says. The truth of the world stabs me in the heart with a blade tethered to a string. and ties me down to the soil where I stand.
That was legitimately profound and
Wow.
extremely
Thank you.
moving. I really dig the very like complex and intricate sort of collection of like allusions and very, very vivid imagery and the mythological stuff. Like you really, I think that like often really legitimately great and lasting works of poetry, like Eliot's The Wasteland, right, occupy that same sort of space where they're like very immediately immediately and tangibly like viscerally feelable, even if you don't know all of the illusions there, but having that level of illusion like that and that level of like reference to like mythology and to human history really really adds a kind of depth and a kind of beauty to the whole thing. No, it was fantastic. Especially really dug the like the shibari net imagery, the idea of like all of humanity kind of tied together with these intricate knots and this sort of very like delicate on the one hand but inescapable net, right? I thought that was beautiful. I thought that was great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Next up is Amanda up next? Amanda, are you still with us? Are you still lucid?
I'd like to donate my time to Tyler so he can sing.
Oh, okay. Well, you'll definitely have to read next time then.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Amanda.
All right, let me see if my guitar's in tune. It's
Okay.
static.
Sure. I think we've got Dawson, and then you can play us out. Okay, Tyler?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no problem. And I don't think just want to make sure there's nobody else that we missed in the queue. Rudy, did you catch anyone else?
I didn't catch anybody else. I ducked out for a second here because of the internet's, but I think Dawson.
Gotcha. If anyone besides Dawson wanted to read, just maybe if you could say so in the chat. If not, we'll do Dawson, and then Tyler will close the night with a song. Dawson, are you with us still?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Yep, I hear.
All right, so this is a piece called Mortuary Science. When we as a people, or maybe more accurately, as a species, were more concerned with nuclear annihilation, the KT extinction event was discussed in terms of kilotons, megatons, death from above. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs impacted the Earth with the force of a 100 million megaton bomb, the textbook said. Fat Man, the bomb that reduced Nagasaki to a radioactive crater, was only 22 kilotons, for those of you keeping score at home. All the tyrannosaurs, the ceratopsians, the sauropods, up in smoke. It could happen to you. Duck and cover, motherfucker. We know better today than we did then. The textbooks now tell us that it was gradual climate change or some festering disease that felled our saurian friends. Instant blinding death is much too Cold War for modern students, a quaint apocalypse. You might as well tell them that it was the Soviets. People today seem to want to savor their deaths, the slow fading of this life into the next, or more likely, into nothing. The doctor called a few weeks ago. He gave it to me straight. The doctor told me I'm dying. I should be grateful, really. Every little boy grows up thinking he'll grow up and make a living as a paleontologist. Precious few actually get to die as one. The fact of my own imminent death has imbued my lectures with an air of almost priestly authority. The students are more attentive than ever. Who better to speak on the dead than the dying? Every Tuesday and Thursday, I enact a one-man dance macabre in the basement of the geology building, pontificating on the virtues of various theories of evolution and extinction while the tumors devour my body from the inside. Here's the truth, I tell them. The fossil record is little more than a geological Rorschach test. Cancer killed the dinosaurs. That's the end.
Oh wow, what a last line. You are really the master of like final lines, I'm discovering in your work, because every piece I've read by you or heard you read, like the last line comes suddenly and kills you.
Thank you.
No, this whole piece was very big mood for me because I've been, as I guess probably everyone, like lately, mortality has very much been on my mind, and like the distinction between like the kind of catastrophic end that you see people almost like fantasizing about on the internet, like sudden and brutal societal collapse on the one hand, and this kind of slow, endless, like immersion in mortality that we seem to all be engaged in now, especially on a daily basis. I don't know. I feel like this piece really fucking captured that. This is a very like right fucking now piece, you know?
I can't remember if I wrote this before or after COVID started. I know the fucking nuclear bomb one I wrote right before COVID happened, and everybody thinks that that's what it's about. So
Yeah. That piece, that piece was in some ways kind of prophetic, or certainly like right on the moment, at the moment, you know, of the moment, whatever. Yeah, because I know we published that March. Our theme was revisionist history, I think, and like little did we know, I guess. Yeah. Thank you, Dawson. Did anyone else want to read before Tyler places something? Oh, Rudy, are you saying something? I don't hear your mic, but the mouth on your terrible avatar is moving.
No, it does that whenever it detects like motion or anything, really. So
Jesus Christ, I hate that. Okay, I think Tyler, you can kind of close us out here then.
Okay. This is a song called Bondurant. My life is better because of cocaine. I now do great things because of cocaine. Cocaine, cocaine, cocaine. Cocaine, cocaine, cocaine. Mamas, don't let your babies be straight. Help them make friends so they can relate. Cocaine, cocaine, cocaine. Cocaine, cocaine, cocaine. I have to get up and work before 9. On my kitchen table, I'm doing lines. Cocaine, cocaine, cocaine. Cocaine, cocaine, cocaine.
Oh man, that was great. You're gonna have to do that more often. You're going to have to serenade us from time to time here at the readings. So
yeah,
I guess
I definitely love that one. I think you should put an album together and try to get some action.
That one's already been on an album.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'll link to it if anyone wants to buy it. I got a fucking pile
Nice.
over there in the corner, right over there.
I
do
think
that.
that can,
Yeah, I'll share it on Twitter too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that one could definitely go big since it's only slightly less explicit than Semi-Charm Kind of Life, which got radio play. So, hey, you never know. Put it out there, man.
Yeah, so
Or
I
slightly
think,
more explicit.
sorry.
Sorry.
So I think I talked over you, Rudy. Sorry about that.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. So that I think it's 10 o'clock now. I think we'll call it a night there. I'm gonna, as always, I'll keep the Zoom meeting up for another hour or so probably, and people can hang out if they want, but I'm gonna end the recording now. If you're watching this on YouTube, once again, Misery Loves Company, Follow us at Misery Tourism. And we will tweet out the link to future readings every Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Oh, and one last very quick thing before we go. Next week's reading is on October 30th, Devil's Night, the day before Halloween. So if anyone has any thematically appropriate shit to read, either anyone in the call right now or anyone watching later, definitely stop by and read. We're looking for satanic Devil's Night Halloween bullshit, Halloween bullshit. Also, if anyone wants to come next week in costume, I think a few people have already said they're going to. Don't be embarrassed to do that, because we'll all some of us will be. Okay, thanks guys. Have a good night.